Timmy, my boy! Miss Turner yelled in horror, rushing to the room. Madame, we need you to leave this room right away, one of the EMTs ordered, blocking her from approaching Timmy. No, that's my son in there. I need to see him. Miss Turner shot back, forcing her way to the room. Miss Turner, we understand that you're desperate to see your son right now, but we need to examine him in order to learn the extent of his injuries. Until then, we need you and your husband to please wait in the waiting room. Once we're done examining him, we'll send one of our staff members to inform you of the situation, the doctors informed sternly. But Timmy needs me, Miss Turner protested. Honey, he's right, Mr. Turner replied. We'll just hold them up. Let's head over to the waiting room for now. Realizing that arguing would get them nowhere, Timmy's parents followed the two nurses standing next to them out of the room. Then they closed the door. The doctor and his nurses began to continue examining Timmy for any further injuries. All the while, Cosmo and Wanda remained scared out of their minds that one of the EMTs checked his heart monitor had been hooked up to Timmy, which monitored his vitals. How long has he been unconscious? The doctor asked one of the EMTs. Ever since we picked him up since that scene, one of the EMT replied. We managed to stabilize his vitals, but his pulse is still very weak, and will need to have a bad concussion and a few broken bones. This is pretty much serious, the doctor replied, then turned to his nurses. We need to stitch up Timmy's surgical wound. Afterwards, he's gonna need x-rays and a CAT scan. Oh no, Cosmo said fearfully, upon hearing the EMT's report. Wanda, I heard them, Cosmo, Wanda replied, cutting him off. We'll just have to hope and pray that the doctors can save him. The two fairies watched as the doctors and nurses worked on hard to save Timmy's life. They stitched up his surgical wounds with fresh stitches and began cleaning the blood off of his body, as they all felt all over his chest for any signs of broken bones. Cosmo and Wanda heard one of the nurses mention that he felt at least had 3 broken ribs on the right side of Timmy's chest, making him even more anxious. After a few minutes, another nurse wheeled a portable x-ray machine into the room and parked it next to Timmy's bed. The nurse then positioned the camera above Timmy's chest and then took a few x-ray photos. Afterwards, they wheeled Timmy into the CAT scan room and lifted him off the stretcher and onto the scanning table. The EMTs then left with the stretcher onwards. Cosmo and Wanda then flew from under the stretcher bed and flew onto the small film room just adjoining the CAT scan room, allowing the small to hang lights at the center of the room. After Timmy was fully laid on the scanning table, it slowly moved forward and stopped in a position where his head was in the center of the scanning ring. The message whirled around softly as it did of a full scan of Timmy's head. Then display the results on the computer screen in the film room. Wanda and Cosmo weren't able to get a good look at the results due to being so high up and far away, but they can already tell that the results weren't good as the other doctors and nurses began murmuring to each other about how bad the damage was. Just as I thought, the doctor said grimly. This kid's gonna need emergency surgery right away. He's got a cracked skull and subnormal hematoria in the back of his head from the fall. Notified the surgery room that we've got a patient coming for a need emergency C-section crematory. Upon realizing that, Cosmo and Wanda felt their blood turn to ice. They had already suspected that Timmy's injuries weren't good, but they didn't want to think that it was that bad. The nurses notified the surgery of the situation, and in less than a few minutes, 2 surgeons wheeled the hospital bed into a room and loaded Timmy onto it. Wanda and Cosmo flew out of the room and followed the surgeons down the hall in the surgery room. Since Vicky wasn't there to sabotage anything, the surgery went along smoothly, without any incidents. Timmy's ribs were reset, and a confront was performed to fix his head injury. The whole surgical process took almost 2 hours. Before Timmy was stitched up and wheeled into the recovery room, with his fairy godparents clinging underneath it in their housefly forms. Once in there, Cosmo and Wanda waited for the adults to leave the room before coming out from underneath the bed. They transformed into their normal forms and gazed down at Timmy and felt their hearts jump at the sight and befell both of them. Timmy's head had been shaved down to almost nothing. A large stitched-up surgical wound was now visible in the back of his head. He had just been dressed in a hospital gown, 2 IV needles had been inserted in his arm, and a heart monitor had been hooked up to him to monitor his vitals. "Timmy," Wanda exclaimed sorrowfully, upon seeing her godson in the horrible state. "Wanda, will he wake up?" Cosmo asked worriedly. I don't know," Wanda replied, trying to hold back tears. The sound of the doors opening could be heard, so Cosmo and Wanda quickly flew on top of the curtain rod in a housefly form to avoid being seen. Timmy's parents had a doctor enter the room and approached the hospital bed Timmy lay in, clearly looking distressed. "Timmy!" Miss Turner gasped in shock, rushing over to his side. "Son!" Mr. Turner exclaimed upon seeing Timmy. "Careful, he needs time to heal. We had to make lots of incisions to fix his skull and broken ribs," the doctor warned them. "Doc, please tell me Timmy's gonna be alright," Miss Turner practically begged. "We'll have some good news and bad news regarding that," the doctor began. "Can you give us the good news first?" Mr. Turner asked. "Well, the good news is that Timmy will live, but it will take a while for him to recover from his injuries in the surgery. He also didn't sustain any serious brain damage, but his speech may be slightly impaired for a while his brain fully heals, meaning that his voice may sound slightly slurred whenever he talks," the doctor replied. "And the bad news?" Miss Turner asked worriedly. "Well, as I mentioned, Timmy will most likely have speech problems due to the injury he received in his head. He will also need to be heavily and avoid heavy activity, such as sports, since his ribs will need time to heal. Timmy will also need to stay in the hospital for a few days to recover his surgery. We may need to place him on a watch for the time being as well," the doctor informed. You can't be serious," Mr. Turner exclaimed in shock. "I'm sorry, Mr. Turner, but it's due to the fact that Timmy's injuries were caused by attempted taking your own life. We'll have to keep a constant eye on him to ensure he doesn't try to harm himself," the doctor replied sadly. Miss Turner gazed down at her son with tears in her eyes. She remembered everything Timmy had said to her hours ago in his room, only realizing how deep his mental scars actually went. He tried to take his own life over everything Vicky done to him? Miss Turner thought, now breaking out in tears. "But why would he do this?" Mr. Turner stammered. "It's because of what happened to Timmy the last time he was here," Miss Turner replied, between tears of sorrow. I spoke with him hours ago, and Timmy, he said he blamed us for what Vicky did to him." "What did he exactly say?" Mr. Turner asked. Miss Turner explained everything that Timmy had told her in full detail, and was shocked to him to the core. He had no idea just how much his hate towards his son had been harboring towards them all this time. But he couldn't exactly blame Timmy. Him and his wife never considered looking into depth of what Vicky had been doing. So Timmy was actually blamed for most of the things Vicky did. In a twisted way, he and his wife were partly to blame for what Vicky had done to Timmy. The other day, during his appendix removal surgery, they had taken Timmy more seriously. That horrible traumatic event could have been avoided, but of course there was no question as to why Timmy had done the thing that he did to himself. After all the years of abuse from Vicky and the neglect from his parents had been slowly building up on pressure on Timmy's mental state, that botched surgery that had the catalyst that caused all of this to become crashing down on him, and this was terrible result of it all. It was the final roar of the avalanche that had started years ago, slowly building up, layer upon layer of stress, abuse, mental instability, and anger onto Timmy's very well-being. Even Cosmo and Wanda couldn't help him. "This is our fault. It's all our fault," Mr. Turner thought as he gazed down at Timmy, battered and broken in his hospital. "We shouldn't have shut him out after all these years. Vicky's mainly to blame for all this abuse he went through. But just as we're guilty, we never took Timmy seriously when this is where he is as a result of it all. What will do once Timmy wakes up? How will we face him after something like this?" Miss Turner stammered. "It may be a while until your son wakes up, Miss Turner. He's still under anesthesia from the surgery, so it'll be about an hour or so when he wakes up. I would suggest waiting in the waiting room until then," the doctor advised her. "If you don't mind, the both of us would like to stay by his side until he wakes up," Mr. Turner requested. "If that's what you want, I'm fine with that." "Just be sure to call the staff once he wakes up," the doctor replied. "We will," Mrs. Turner replied. The doctor left the recovery room after that, leaving Timmy alone with his parents and fairy godparents. Timmy continued to sleep for the next hour or so, until around 5 p.m., then began stirring slightly, catching his parents' attention. "Looks like he's waking up," Mr. Turner said. Timmy's mother said nothing as Timmy began slowly opening and blinking his tired eyes. She knew for a fact that he wasn't going to be happy to see them, not after what Timmy had said back at home. Timmy's father seemed to be having the same thoughts, judging by his reaction, clearly looking worried. Once Timmy's eyes were fully opened, he looked around, nearly confused as to where he was. However, as Timmy began to realize where he was, his expression changed from confusion to fear. No, why am I here? What's going on?" Timmy stammered fearfully, his voice sounding slurred. "Timmy, it's all right," his mother said, trying to calm him down. "You just had a surgery from falling off of the building, and you hit your head very hard," Mr. Turner explained. "And a few of your ribs got broken too, so you'll need to be careful and not to move so roughly." "What?" Timmy exclaimed, then reached up and felt his head. His eyes widened as he noticed that all of his hair had been trimmed very short, and he felt the surgical wound on the back of his head. He remembered jumping off that tall building. Timmy had also remembered Cosmo and Wanda transforming into airbags to soften his fall, but it hasn't been foolproof. The last thing Timmy remembered was landing on the roof of a car, and then hitting his head hard, and then blacked out. As reality began to sinking in, Timmy felt a rush of anger, frustration, and hatred run through upon realizing that he was still alive. No, why? Why? Timmy suddenly yelled, shaking his head in anger. "Timmy, calm down," his mother urged him. "No!" Timmy yelled, grabbing his face and shaking his head. "Why did you let me live? Why couldn't you just let me die?" "Timmy, stop. We're trying to help you," Timmy's father said, reaching out to grab Timmy's wrists. Timmy pulled away and yelled, "I don't want your help. I don't want anyone's help. I just want the pain to end." Cosmo and Wanda desperately wanted to help Timmy, but there was no way they could show themselves with his parents around. "Honey, you better call the staff here," Timmy's father said to his wife as he grabbed his son's wrists. "Let me go!" Timmy yelled, trying to break free. His mother hit the call button above Timmy's bed, then tried to get Timmy under control. "Timmy, you have to stop this. I know what happened to you was horrible, but that doesn't mean you should try and take your own life," his mother said, trying to get Timmy to calm down. "Shut up! Just shut up! I hate you! You let that monster into my life, and she ruined it, and it's all your fault! It's all your fault!" Timmy screamed at the top of his voice, yanking free of his father's grasp and trying to stand up, but stopped upon feeling the jolt of pain running through his chest. Timmy gripped his chest and growled in pain. He sunk back into the hospital bed as he did. 2 nurses rushed up to the room to see what was going on. Upon seeing Timmy now awake, they had called for the doctor, who had showed up in less than a minute. Once he saw that Timmy was awake, he quickly rushed over to the hospital bed and gently pushed Timmy back against the bed, trying to sit up again. Timmy, try not to move so much. Your ribs need time to heal along with your skull, the doctor instructed him. Timmy simply glared up and said, Why do you care? I want this. I didn't want to be alive anymore. Why couldn't you just leave me alone? Timmy, you have a lot more to live for than you think, the doctor replied. What would you know? You don't know me, Timmy snapped back coldly. You can't possibly understand what I've been through. Actually, I do, the doctors countered. This whole hospital already knows about what Vicky did to you in the surgery room the other day of your appendix removal operation. I am so very sure that I can guess that experience did to you. However, you shouldn't have tried taking your own life over it. There are many ways you can overcome it. No, I can't, Timmy protested. I tried, I really did, but I can't get what happened out of my head. That's perfectly normal for someone who's gone through a botched surgery. I believe what you're experiencing is PTSD, and that's a very common thing that occurs from that. Therapy is one of the common ways to treat it, the doctor explained. He's right, Timmy, his father said. And I promise you that we'll also help you in any way we can to get over this. Really? You didn't seem eager to help me after all the times I called Vicky out. So why should I believe in a word that you say? Timmy snapped, folding his arms and glaring down at his bed. His parents couldn't argue on that one. Timmy, we know how angry you are with us. Please, hear us out, Mr. Turner begged him. What could you possibly have told me that would help me? Timmy asked coldly. Timmy, you have the right to be angry at us, and you were right about what you said, his mother began. If you want to hate me and your father for the rest of your life, for not being there for you, we'll understand. But I ask you to please at least try and forgive us. If you do that, it will mean the world for us. Please don't ever do this again, Timmy. You can't even begin to understand how terrified we were to find out that you jumped off of that building. We thought you were dead. Cosmo and Wanda had been listening to everything they said, and as being prompted to Wanda to try and talk some sense into Timmy, she zoomed out from under the bed in horsefly form, and then landed next to Timmy, being careful not to be spotted. Wanda then transformed into a flea and jumped into Timmy's ear. Timmy, it's me, Wanda, Wanda whispered. I know you're very angry at your parents after all the neglect they showed towards you. But please, try and forgive them and give them another chance. If you only focus on the bad thoughts that happened to you as a result of their neglect, you'll never be able to move on. Please, Timmy, do it for us, and do it for them. Me and Cosmo love you so much, and we don't want you to shut out the rest of the world for the rest of your life. Cosmo quickly turned into a flea and jumped into Timmy's other ear, and then said, Wanda's right, Timmy. I'm not the brightest fairy around, and I admit it, but I know one thing. Your parents love you very much, and while you may not have had a happy beginning with them, it doesn't have to end badly. They truly are willing to change their ways. With Vicky gone, things will be much better, and everyone's willing to help you get over with what happened to you. You shouldn't just shut the whole world pretty much to end badly, but everyone is trying to help you and get over what happened to you. So everyone is willing to help you, and me and Wanda will do that, as well as the extent of the rules. So will you do that for us? Timmy thought about it for a moment, but simply forgiving his parents right then and there on the spot was obviously a no-go. It was clear to him that they were truly sorry for the way they treated him after all these years, and for not listening to him about Vicky. But Timmy had suffered horribly as a result of their neglect and ignorance, and was something that he couldn't forgive right then and there. But of course, right away, it would obviously take him a long time before Timmy could actually forgive his parents for not treating him like a true son. But he also knew that Cosmo and Wanda had a good point. If Timmy just shut everyone out around him, simply because of his parents and Vicky, he'd never be able to move on. Yet the main reason Timmy had tried taking his own life was because of what happened to him in the surgery room, and was impossible for him to sleep normally without nightmares or flashbacks. All that moment where he was mobilized in the surgery table, unable to see or move or speak, the surgeons had sliced into him with their surgical tools, coupled with the abuse of Vicky had inflicted on him in the past, and the neglect from his parents. It all driven Timmy to the point of ending his own life. Should I even try? I mean, Cosmo and Wanda do have a point, but Timmy thought before pausing for a moment. He briefly had a flashback of the botched surgery, but shook the thought out of his mind when he remembered that Vicky had been detained and was no longer a threat to him. The mental scars that she left through were very deep, and would take a very long time for those scars to heal. However, his parents were really willing to change. Timmy finally decided that he'd give him one more chance at redemption. With a sigh, Timmy had to be honest. I can't forgive you both that easy. You left me and Vicky mercy and refused to even consider looking into her activities when I called her out on her abuse towards me. And you've neglected me so many times in the past that I can't even put into words. Had you actually ever listened to me, things may actually have been different, and I wouldn't be in this situation. While I certainly can't condone the neglect you've shown towards me in the past, I will admit that you deserve a chance to redeem yourselves. You clearly want to do that, and I'll accept it. But don't think about that means I've forgiven you two. It's going to be a very long time before I can do that. His parents simply nodded their heads in shame, and the doctor seemed pretty disturbed by what Timmy had just said. He had no idea that things had been serious for him regarding his home life. Cosmo and Wanda were very pleased with Timmy, and they all knew it. It wouldn't be easy for him. They were sure that he'd recover slowly over time. You did good, Timmy. Me and Cosmo are so proud of you, Wanda said inside Timmy's right ear. Good choice of words, kiddo, Cosmo added in Timmy's other ear. His fairy godparents then jumped out of his window of his ears and hopped back towards the top of the curtain rod, then transformed back into housefly forms. Timmy's parents looked quite relieved that he was willing to let them redeem themselves, but they seemed a bit upset that he wouldn't forgive them. But it was completely understandable. After all, it wasn't like Timmy could just forgive him right away, due to all the damage that he had done to his mental health over the years from neglect. It would certainly take some time for Timmy's parents to work her up enough to trust him again and to have him forgive him. We understand, Timmy, Miss Turner said. You have our word that we'll change our ways, and whatever happened the other day and today really opened our eyes, and we are going to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And that's a promise, Miss Son, Mr. Turner added. You won't have to worry about being alone again. You've got our backs. Timmy felt a bit better after hearing that, but he was still uneasy about the future would bring. Getting over his PTSD wouldn't be a very easy by a long shot. It would take some time for Timmy to overcome the trauma of what happened on that day in the surgery room. Even Cosmo and Wanda at his side. What about the court date with Vicky? Timmy asked, sounding a bit nervous upon mentioning that evil teen. We've got notified about the court of what happened. They're actually going to be adding additional charges to Vicky's rap sheet for causing a victim to try and take their own life. Since you ended up with PTSD from Vicky's evil little act in the surgery and almost died from attempting to take your own life as a result of it, Timmy's going to be charged for that as well, his mother explained. Timmy felt a bit more safe upon hearing that. Nothing pleased him more than hearing Vicky suffer further misfortune. While Timmy had still been afraid to face Vicky again, he was eager to see what kind of sentencing she'd get as a result of her crimes. However, this would have to wait since Timmy would need time to recover. Good. Vicky deserves for all she's done, Timmy said. Honestly, Timmy, I could work my will. I'd beat that heartless bitch with a broomstick. I could promise you that Vicky's never setting foot on our property again. And even if she tries touching you, she'll have to go through his father promised. Mr. and Mrs. Turner, I hate to interrupt you and your son, but I do need to examine him to make sure that he didn't hurt himself after waking up. Also, as I mentioned, Timmy will need to be placed on watch since his injuries were caused by self-harm. The doctor interrupted. Doc, does it really have to be this way? Miss Turner asked, unhappy. It is patient protocol, Miss Turner, but if he behaves well and doesn't try hurting himself, we'll ease the restrictions, the doctor replied. Afterwards, the doctor checked on Timmy all over for possible injuries he might have inflicted on himself after waking up. Afterwards, several hospital security guards were assigned to the recovery room to ensure that Timmy didn't attempt to try and hurt himself again. His recovery wasn't easy either. The next 5 days involved psychological physical therapy to ensure that Timmy could walk around more easily, and it provides slightly difficult since the first time he hit his head after he felt dizzy and swirly. However, whenever Timmy tried walking around, his chest also started to begin to hurt once the painkillers wore off. So Timmy had often having trouble putting any sort of pressure on his chest. Cosmo and Wanda were also there to keep him company when the guards weren't looking, but they were forced to remain housefly for him since Timmy was mostly kept under watch by the hospital security guards. However, the nightmares still came in night when he fell asleep. This caused Timmy to wake up in the middle of the night in cold sweat. Luckily, Cosmo and Wanda were there to help him, since the hospital security guards weren't around in the hospital room at night, so Timmy was able to fall back to sleep with their help.